We need to overturn that law for good. Otherwise, this BOI rule could just keep coming back.
The Small Business Rundown is the official podcast of the National Federation of Independent Business, the member-driven voice of small business. NFIB and our members advocate to keep America's small businesses strong and independent in Washington, D.C., all 50 states, and the nation's courts.
Welcome to the Small Business Rundown, a bi-weekly podcast with information on independent businesses' victories and challenges in Washington, D.C. and state capitals. I'm Jeff Brabant, NFIB's Vice President of Federal Government Relations, sitting in as guest host this week. Small business owners recently won a major victory in the fight to protect their privacy from the federal beneficial ownership information reporting law that affected more than 32 million small businesses. Here to explain the current status of that regulatory battle and what it means for small businesses is NFIB's Vice President and Executive Director of the Small Business Legal Center, Beth Milito, and NFIB's Director of Federal Government Relations, Josh Mcleod. Beth, Josh, thanks for joining me to share the latest on beneficial ownership.
Thanks for inviting us to be here today, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff. Great to be here.
Beth, can you start by explaining the recent win for small businesses through the Trump administration's new rule?
You bet. So March was an exciting month in NFIB's fight against the beneficial ownership rule. We started off the month on March 2nd with President Trump coming out and announcing that the BOI rule was outrageous and invasive, an absolute disaster for American small businesses, and an economic menace that would soon be no more. So after 5 years of fighting in the courts, in the executive agencies, and of course in Congress, we finally had the attention of the president coming out and saying this was a bad idea. And shortly thereafter, the U.S. Treasury Department made an announcement, and on March 21, in a rule it issued, announced that U.S. domestic companies, so U.S. companies and U.S. persons were going to be exempted from BOI reporting. So it was a great win, and I think a testament to the noise that NFIB was making over just the last month, really.
What have you been hearing from NFIB members after the decision was made in March to roll back this rule?
A lot of relief from members, but also uncertainty from business owners who went ahead and reported their information. With the ping-ponging back and forth, with the rule paused, unpaused, paused again, then unpaused, a lot of business owners opted to go ahead and report their information. In fact, the U.S. Treasury Department estimates that over a third of the businesses that were subject to the BOI rule went ahead and reported. So this is why it is so important that we make sure that the U.S. Treasury Department destroys this data. And this is going to be part of our repeal effort, too. So we want to make sure that this information is not sitting out there in this registry that local law enforcement can access at some point. We want this information destroyed to alleviate any concern from business owners that went ahead and reported information.
So, can you explain for our listeners whether reporting is currently needed for small businesses and if that can still be overturned?
Unfortunately, it could still be overturned. But yes, let me answer your question. So to start with, U.S. companies and U.S. persons at this time do not need to report beneficial ownership information. So the rule has been paused through at least the end of 2025. So great win. One question we do get now from members who did go ahead and file the report, which was certainly understandable with all the back and forth we had with the courts, is, well, what happens to my information? I filed it, and now what? The government has all this information. So in response to U.S. Treasury's rule, NFIB filed a letter, and one of the things we thanked Treasury for issuing this rule, stopping the reporting through the rest of the year, but we also called on U.S. Treasury to destroy all information it had collected so far. So that is something we are continuing to push for, is that Treasury destroys all the information it collected, and we are continuing to ask the U.S. Treasury Department and Congress to overturn the Corporate Transparency Act, and that was the law that established this BOI reporting regime.
Thank you, Beth. That's very important. Josh, in terms of small business owners speaking out and advocacy with Congress, what's next in the fight to make this win permanent?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jeff. And, I think small business owners have been vital in this fight against beneficial ownership. And quite frankly, they are the reason why there is so much momentum on this issue, either with the administration or in Congress. And, we've got 139 co-sponsors on the repeal legislation in the House. We've got 28 in the Senate. we're going to keep pushing to repeal the Corporate Transparency Act, make sure that there's long-term certainty for small businesses so they will not have to deal with that pinball back and forth. Okay, 4 years, we're going to have relief. 4 years or 8 years, here we go. We're going to ramp up reporting requirements. So we want to provide long-term certainty. So we're going to continue to pressure Congress, as Beth said, delete that data of U.S. businesses that have filed. We're going to continue to advocate that Congress repeal the Corporate Transparency Act to ensure that a future administration cannot revive this statute.
Thank you, Josh. Beth, can you talk about NFIB's lawsuit to stop the unconstitutional Corporate Transparency Act and where it stands today?
So NFIB has been fighting the Corporate Transparency Act beneficial ownership reporting for 5 years now on all fronts, and in the courts, in Congress, and in the agencies. And we jumped into a court battle against the Corporate Transparency Act in 2024. We had an initial win in the trial court, the U.S. District Court down in Texas. And right now, the case is pending in the appellate court, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. We have filed briefs in the Fifth Circuit, and we have asked the Federal Court of Appeals to go ahead and rule in our favor in this case. Because again, as Josh just said, our ultimate goal is to overturn the Corporate Transparency Act. We need to overturn that law for good. Otherwise, this BOI rule could just keep coming back. So we are continuing to fight in the courts in addition to in Congress.
Thank you, Beth. Josh, what do you recommend for small business owners or supporters of small business who want to get involved in this issue?
Continue to advocate. They've done such a great job with NFIB, with Congress, with the administration. We've got to continue that drumbeat and make sure that they continue to hear about the need to repeal the Corporate Transparency Act. So we're going to keep pushing as an organization, and we need them to share their stories, to contact their members of Congress, to write op-eds, to contact the administration and say, you've got to get this done. And that way, the future administration cannot revive this statute.
You're a federal lobbyist. How has NFIB members reaching out to members of Congress affected the repeal legislation, other legislation in Congress?
It's been incredible. The small business stories that they hear basically moves them to a place where they could be neutral or not supportive to a place where they are supportive. And we've picked up a whole lot of support on Capitol Hill because of our members and small businesses that have advocated for that repeal. So that's why it's so important that we continue to share those stories and contact their members of Congress.
We have heard from some small business owners that are concerned about if they're filing their beneficial ownership information in the right location. Are there scams out there? Have you heard any stories from small business owners on this issue?
Unfortunately, we have. One story was from a farmer in Indiana who went to one of the websites that came up on a Google search result. And it was not from FinCEN, but it was one of these companies that can assist with your filing. And unfortunately, this farmer paid $249 to this company, did not complete submission of his BOI information, but was still charged with that $249. So now he's in a lurch. He doesn't know how to get his money back. He doesn't know where his information has gone with this company. And unfortunately, this is the reality that small businesses face. And it provides one other story of why we should repeal this legislation.
Thank you, Josh. While business owners do not have to file today, as we discussed, Beth, if you are a small business owner and you chose to file and you don't want to get scammed, where would one do that?
So you can still file if you want, and you need to make sure that you are on fincen.gov. .gov means it's the government website, and there is no charge to file the BOI report. So you can pay a third-party vendor or pay your CPA or your attorney to file for you, but you can also file yourself or have your manager file. So there is no charge to file. fincen.gov. That is the official government website to file the BOI reports.
Is there anything else small business owners need to know about beneficial ownership information reporting?
Members can support the fight against the Corporate Transparency Act by going to NFIB's webpage, nfib.com/protectprivacy. And on that page, you can find the latest on where things stand in Congress and also directly contact your elected representatives with your story about why it's important to overturn this law.
Josh, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think the fight on BOI is truly a grassroots movement, and it's the small business stories that are really moving the political needle. So, as Beth was saying, we've got to continue to hear from small businesses, and Congress needs to continue to hear. So, please continue to advocate to repeal the beneficial ownership reporting requirement.
Josh, Beth, thank you both. We appreciate your time on this crucial issue.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
As Josh said, now is the time to urge Congress to repeal the Corporate Transparency Act and require the Treasury Department to delete the data that small business owners previously submitted. You'll find the link for that in the show notes, along with resources to learn more and stay up to date on this issue. If you have questions or there's a topic that you'd like us to cover on a future episode of the podcast, please send us an email at podcast@nfib.org. And I want to thank you, the listeners, for joining us on today's Small Business Rundown. We'll be back every 2 weeks bringing you news and analysis from Washington, D.C. and state capitals so that you, whether you're a business owner or supporter of one, can continue to blaze a trail.
The Small Business Rundown is brought to you by NFIB, the voice of small business. You can find us at nfib.com and on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn.